Come on in, everybody. Grab a chair. We will commence momentarily. Well, happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to another SCORE Memphis webinar. My name is Gary Robinson. I'm the chapter chair of the Memphis chapter of SCORE, and we are delighted that you've chosen to spend part of your morning with us today. Today's webinar, as you know, is a new one in our nonprofit series. It's actually not a new one. It's an existing one she's done before. It's called Nonprofit Essentials. But before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to tell you a bit about SCORE Memphis and the things we offer small business owners and those who are looking to start small businesses. You can see our previous recorded webinars by going to our reconfigured website, memphis.score.org, and clicking on Local Business Education and then on Recorded Webinars. And speaking of memphis.score.org, you can go there for all your SCORE needs. SCORE has 226 chapters nationwide with 10,000 volunteers. We're a nationwide nonprofit resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration, and we offer a vast array of free resources on our website, a robust education program, and free confidential mentoring. You can go to memphis.score.org to find answers to your business questions, to request a mentor, or to see and register for our upcoming webinars. We've got 3 more webinars this month. On September 19, we're back with a deeper dive into using LinkedIn and X, the former Twitter, to promote your business. On September 21, today's speaker will be back with a session called Becoming Grant Ready. And we close the month on September 27 with a look at TikTok. To register, go to the Local Business Education tab on memphisscore.org and look for local events. It's all free. And even if you have a conflict in time, please register anyway. We record these Zoom sessions and send the link to the recording and to available slide decks to all our registrants. So while we go to today's webinar, as we start, as always, I want to let you know that this session is being conducted in the webinar format on Zoom, meaning the attendees are muted to cut down on the ambient noise. If you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom and type in your question. Periodically, we will stop and ask our presenter the questions, and she will give you some great answers. So make sure you put in your questions in the Q&A button. So our speaker today is Cheryl Smith. She is an American grant writer, nonprofit trainer, and consultant. She's been in the nonprofit industry for more than 25 years. And as the CEO of Doolin Nonprofit Services, Cheryl helps more than 3,000 nonprofit organizations build sustainability through training, coaching, and grant writing. She's also the author of the book, 21 Ways to Fund a Nonprofit. She's a member of the American Grant Writers Association, a nonprofit trainer for SCORE chapters across the U.S., as well as a guest speaker for many public, private, and faith-based organizations. Broadly, Cheryl's specialty is building capacity in people and organizations and helping them to reach their highest and best potential. She's done a wonderful job teaching SCORE clients about nonprofits, and we are delighted, as always, that she's back with us. Cheryl, how are you doing?
Amazing. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here with SCORE. Gosh, I feel like, we've been doing this for a while now. I feel like it's my family too. And so happy to be here to share today. So thank you so much, Gary, for the welcome. And hey, everybody, I am super duper excited about our journey today. We're going to talk about nonprofit essentials, the kinds of things that, those books, the things you wish you knew, nobody ever told you. So we're going to talk about quite a few of those things this morning, just making sure that you have the resources in mind that can help you to move your nonprofits forward. Today is about you. So if there are questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. because I want to get to them. Inevitably, we're going to be talking about some things that you do know, things that you don't know, or things you're just curious about. And so if it's on target, like what we're talking about today, let's go ahead and get those in our Q&A. If they're off topic, I promise to try to reserve some time to circle back and get to some of those off topic questions that, you just wish you had somebody to ask about nonprofits. And so I'm going to do my best to reserve some time to get at some of those questions too. But today is a very hearty meeting. It's content heavy. I tend to do that on purpose. So I actually do know that slide shares don't have to have a lot of content, but I want you to have it so that in retrospect, when you go back to look at things, you've got information there that's going to help you. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug us in. There's always a slide about my history and my past, because I want you guys to, when you look back, to know that you were in good hands. Right now, I'm going to make sure we're in the right place. So you're in the right place if you are an emerging nonprofit organization. If you have just newly formed, so you're not necessarily, thinking about it, you've actually done it. You've newly formed your organization. If you feel like you've missed something, like you knew what the passion and the mission was, but you felt like there were some pieces that you just didn't know. And if that's you, you're in the right place. You're in the right place if you are definitely open to learning. I'm one of those people who, I'm so not a know-it-all. I mean, there's so many more things, even in this industry for which I am an expert, that I learn something new every single day. So if you're open to learning and if you're ready to take action, you are so in the right place, and welcome. Now, we're going to talk about the first 12 months. Even if you've already started your organization, no worries. Just take a look back to see some of the things you may have already done versus some of the things that you still have yet to do. And so I want your path to success to be super clear. And I'm going to share a lot, but before I do, I don't want you to walk away from this conversation feeling overwhelmed. I want you to know Rome wasn't even built in a day. So I want you just to take the information, start one thing at a time, something that is manageable, and just know that you are still moving forward. And that's in itself success. Don't try to take everything at once or feel some kind of way about it if it feels like a lot. And it could, because we're going to take this quarter by quarter. Our discussion is quarterly planning, annual compliance, planning and development, and then nonprofit support. The lion's share of my conversation with you today is actually quadrant 1, quarterly planning. So we're going to spend a lot of time there. And the other 2-3 bullets, maybe 5-10 minutes of conversation. But for the most part, we're going to spend time in looking at what really should happen each quarter. And for quarterly planning, there's a lot. I mean, this is a sector that's filled with lots of opportunity for growth. So I'm going to look at months 1 through 12, and we're going to break it down in the quarter. So your first quarter is your planning quarter. We're going to look at the board meetings, program development, required registrations, etc. This might be, if you don't want to wait for your slides, this might be a really good screen to just go ahead and snag your screenshot. There really isn't a reason to snag that for future screens, because you're going to get the slides. But if you want to just remember, you can take your screenshot here. But these are the topics that we're going to cover starting now. So we're going to start with our first 3 months, our first quarter. And so let me also say, which I didn't say earlier, your quarter is going to look different for you. And so if you say are on the calendar year, then your first 3 months, obviously it's going to be January through, March, end of March, starting new quarter with April. But there are a lot of nonprofits where your quarter starts, say, on the government fiscal year, which is October 1. And so your third quarter is summertime. We'd be in, your third quarter now. And so I want you to be thinking about when your fiscal year starts. And this is what I mean by the quarters, which is the reason I don't have months listed. So quarter 1, when you are just getting started, this is the time you plan. Abraham Lincoln said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. And I cannot tell you how invaluable that statement is, because you don't want to get into the quarter just doing things without any, plan. Planning is your first mark of success. And so we want you to lay your foundation. And that includes, creating context around your board meetings, looking at your program development, getting on board with those required registrations. your nonprofit insurance, thinking about it. Hopefully you're actually going to secure insurance, but at least you're thinking about what kinds of insurance might be needed. And then internal controls, and that's just how you're going to protect your organization. And so I want to dig into what this really means for you. And when we think about board meetings, we'll start right there. When we think about board meetings, so often I've participated in them. I'm a chair of a board now, so I lead them. And folks have the misconception that the board meeting is where you come together, you do all of the work, and you're having these meaningful discussions. And that's only semi-true. The board isn't a place where you come just to talk. It really isn't. You are at a meeting to make a decision that moves your nonprofit forward. So if you don't have any decisions to make, if there is nothing to vote on, then there really shouldn't be a meeting. There may be committees, which we're going to talk about, but the meeting is very, very concisely defined. It is a place that you come together to make a decision, vote on something that moves your organization forward. So that's the purpose of your board meeting. And if you are newly formed, it is a very common practice to have a meeting every month. You've got to be deciding and voting on something on a regular basis. And so having monthly meetings makes sense. Now, by best practice standards, these meetings start to happen quarterly once you get your feet on the ground and you feel like you've gotten your bearings. But in the very beginning, you set the tone for how often these meetings should happen, right? And so common practice once a month. Before a meeting, and this is really important when you're new, before a meeting, you'll create your corporate binder. It is so important to have this binder for many, many, many reasons. First reason is this binder is going to be issued to all of your board members and contain some really specific information that every governing body or board member needs to have access to. Okay, so you want to create this before you enter your first board meeting. And then this binder can be a physical binder, or it can be a virtual binder where you have a shared drive, or both. Okay. Since COVID, many people have these binders on shared drives, but before COVID, I'd walk into a board meeting and that's where you were issued your binder and you started to proceed with the meeting. Now, what's in it? Well, first off, your organizing documents. Your binder is going to hold all of the things that usually don't change or don't change often, so that you've got a history for your nonprofit. And your organizing documents, chances are, you may not change them ever, but if you do, there might be one or two amendments. But usually, once you have your articles of incorporation set, those are your foundational documents that don't change. And so you're going to have a copy of those organizing documents. You're going to have a copy of your board agenda and your meetings. And remember, this binder is going to be your history. And so you want to be able to share where you've come, the path you've taken to arrive at where you are today. And so when you create an agenda for your board, those are topics of things that need to get, remember, voted on. And so you want to have a history of those votes. And so you keep your board agenda and those minute meetings. That just means a summary of what happened within the meeting. So somebody's going to, and we'll talk about who the somebody is, somebody's going to take and record the board meeting, and they call that minutes. And so that's also included in the binder. Your board resumes are in there. Yeah. And so many of you, and I get to say this because I literally talk to, it feels like a few hundred new nonprofits every month. And so I get the privilege of having these wonderful conversations. And so in these conversations, I discovered that we bring on board members through begging and pleading. And oftentimes we don't always collect the pertinent information that we need to make sure that we can pursue funding and we actually know who's on our team. And so I'm going to suggest that we collect those resumes up front. And so those resumes will go into your binder. You're also going to have any binding agreements. And a binding agreement is something, seriously, as simple as your bank account documents. Anything that binds your organization to an agreement for something or someone, it goes in your binder because you want a history of your agreements. And so you're going to have all of these things in your binder. And I don't think I have a bullet for, and I don't have a bullet for bylaws, but that's part of your organizing documents. So remember to have your bylaws in there as well. Now, when we talk about resumes, and so I'm going to have this conversation with you guys. It just really is a necessary conversation because I'm also a grant writer. And so that means I pursue grants for organizations. And when I do that, I need to have some very concise information on your board. And I've realized that it's not congruent. Like resumes are just all over the place, and they're really not usable when it's time to apply for funding. So you want to collect from your board members the boring, basic, standard resume. I mean, the chronological resume, plain white paper. I mean, we don't need the resumes that has everybody's photo on it and it's different colors and raised print. I promise if the resumes could sing, they'd be singing music. So we don't need any of those things. We just need something that's nice and boring and plain, and that really looks consistent across each member, so that if you are applying for funding where that funder requests resumes, it's really easy and seamless for them to go through and get the information that they need. And it shows uniformity for your organization as well. So ask for plain and boring resumes. Telling you, it's the best. The other thing is, I went backwards. We want to go forward. So the other thing is keeping that binder in your agreement with all of the things that bind the organization, like we mentioned that earlier. And this is all important, you guys, because inevitably your board is going to change over. You're going to elect new members. You're going to, sadly, in many cases, say goodbye to some, longstanding members, but your board composition is going to change. And when that happens, new board members are going to need access to key information that's going to help them understand the organization that they're now a part of, and also see and determine the health of the organization based on that binder. So that's really, really important. And so now let's assume the binder's intact and you are ready for your first board meeting. What happens? What are you doing there? You're not just there talking about the game or whatever it's going to, coming up in your environment. What are you doing in that first meeting? Well, the first meeting is so important, and many people miss some key steps for their first meeting. That really means if they don't do some of these things, they're not having official meetings thereafter. So let's talk about what makes your meeting official. What do you do first? Well, you're going to elect your directors. And so many of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, we already have our board. We just went through this whole, speech about board of directors. Well, they're not official unless they're elected. So these are just folks coming together that love what you do until you elect them. And so in your first meeting, you're going to elect your board of directors, and you're going to first and foremost elect your chair. And then you're going to elect to your secretary. If you don't get to any other position, you need those two, and those positions cannot be the same. So you need those two positions because somebody has to officiate the meeting. That's your chair. And somebody needs to record the meeting. That's your secretary. So before you do anything else, you need those two positions, and then you can elect all of the other ones, the standard board members, your treasurer, anybody else that you want. But you lead that meeting with getting yourself a chair that can officiate your meeting, okay? And then once you've got your directors elected, and that can happen pretty quickly, then you're going to appoint your officers. And so back to a conversation I have so often when I have this training, so I'm answering questions you might be thinking along the way that I typically get. So your officers, yes, you needed those officers when you created your corporation at the state level. The state asked, who are the officers? And then inevitably you wrote down, we've got a CEO, we have a CFO, we have a secretary, you name it. You've named your officers. Well, those are temporary officers. They don't become official until the board elects them, and they can only be elected by the board. So your board is going to elect your officers, and then thereafter, you're going to approve your bylaws, and then you start to get into the business of the day. The bylaws are your governing documents, which is going to really tell how you're going to govern yourselves. Like, how are you going to make sure that everybody there is doing the things that the organization needs done for the organization? So that means your bylaws may say, indicate things like how often you're going to meet as a board, how long those meetings will be, if there are going to be any required contributions from the board, whether what positions you're going to have and the description of those positions. That document really is going to be your living, breathing Bible for how you're going to set up and interact with each other on this board and govern the organization long term. So you're going to approve those bylaws. If you need, and I tend to think most organizations do, a conflict of interest policy. That happens in the first meeting. And then if you've got any other resolutions, remember we talked about binding agreements. If you're opening a bank account, you do need permission for that. You can't just do it. So after you voted that this should happen at this bank and this type of account, then you can go forth and actually open the account. So any other, thing that you need to vote on. And I will tell you that having lived this out a few times, this is probably all you'll get around to in the first meeting. There's just a lot happening, a lot of moving parts. But if you have allotted ample time and you have time for other things, the other things that should happen either in this first meeting or at least at the very next meetings is you may have time to start the process of discussing the programs. And although as a governing body, you're not going to be responsible for the day-to-day operation of the program, but you are responsible for setting those programs up, setting up the parameters for which those programs are going to operate and making sure they're mission aligned with the organization. So that's a board job. And so if you've got time, you'll discuss that. I don't believe you'll have time in the first meeting, but I have it there anyway. And if you also have time, yes.
Cheryl, I got a question before you get to the next slide, because I know we're into the maybe part of the first meeting. As you as the founder of this organization, are you essentially running the first meeting until you can appoint officers, and you have now a chairman who's actually running the meeting?
So the answer is maybe, and that's the answer to a lot of nonprofit questions. And so the reason I say maybe is if you are the founder, but you did not elect yourself, but you did not designate yourself as the temporary chair, then no, whoever the temporary chair is will run this first meeting. But if you are the founder and you've also said, I don't really know who any of these positions are going to be, then yeah, as the founder, you're going to take the lead, at least bringing the organization together for the first meeting. And in the first meeting, the first item of agenda is electing your board. So even if you're the founder and you don't want to be chair and somebody else is elected chair, they take over from that point on. I hope that makes sense?
Yeah, that's good. The other question I had was about the bylaws. Is you as the founder, and I realize you can't speak for every organization, but do you generally, as a founder, bring suggested bylaws with you?
Yes.
So you're presenting them for their approval and discussion, as opposed to throwing the floor out. Okay, kids, let's have some bylaws.
Yeah, no. And so, and we're going to actually talk about that when we get to the committees. So you don't do work in the meeting. The only work you do in the meeting is contemplation. You don't actually do work. And so if we're voting on something, that means it's done before we get there. So we can't vote on directors unless they already know they're going to be voted on. We can't get the bylaws voted on unless everybody's already had a copy of it. So when we talk about setting up an agenda for a meeting, before you walk into a meeting, if there's something that's going to be voted on, that means that something has already been communicated and or delivered to your members so that they've already had an opportunity to review it. And so if you are the founder, this is what I encourage, because we actually establish nonprofits. And so I always say to folks that are contemplating starting a nonprofit, do you have a preliminary board? Do you have a group of folks that you're going to be working with in the organization? And if they say yes, and I'm usually hoping that they do, then I encourage those, even if it's like 2 or 3 people, you guys come together. And let me just back up. If you've hired somebody to establish your nonprofit organization for you, it's a very good chance they're going to give you your first bylaws, at least the template for which the board will contemplate, And if you're not working with somebody and you're establishing your own nonprofit, which happens all the time, then you and your small group, will come together and decide on what those bylaws look like. And before the first meeting, you've already emailed that document out to the people who are going to be at that meeting, so that in the meeting we can vote on them. And so I'm glad you bring that question up, because what sometimes happens, Gary, is if they don't have bylaws well in advance and have been working on their thoughts on it, then when you get to the first meeting, you usually just vote that there will be bylaws, that these are temporary bylaws, and that you will create the official copy through committee. And so that is very normal, so that everybody has an opportunity to have their voice heard, because once the bylaws are created and they have been approved, you are required to live by those bylaws, and they can only be changed by 2/3 vote.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And so if you have time, you're going to talk about committees, so that's actually, thank you. That's a perfect segue into this next conversation. Gary has probably cheated and seen my slides. He already knew the questions to ask. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. All right. So committees. And so as we talk about the board, and I mentioned that the board isn't the time where you guys start doing your math equations. The board is the time, the place where you show your work. You've already done the work. You're showing the work here. And so you do that by way of committee. The whole purpose of your committee is to actually think about the things that need to be voted on and have the work done outside of the meeting so that you can bring in that opportunity for a vote to the meeting. And your committees, you only need 2 people to form a committee. And there's so many committees you could form. I'm going to just talk to you guys about some of the basic ones. And so finance committee is a basic committee. You need the finance committee because you're going to need to approve financial stuff like your budget. That's your plan for the year. You're going to need to make sure you have financial statements. That's a finance committee job. If you're deciding that you want an audit done, that's a finance committee job. External audit, I mean. If you're going to do internal audits, like those surprise audits to make sure everybody is playing nice in the sandbox financially, that's a finance committee job. If you are wanting to make sure that you've got income and sustainability, that is traditionally a fundraising committee job, right? So fundraising committee, they're the fun folks. And so it doesn't mean that they do all the work and that they show up at all the fundraisers. It just means that you are really using their brains to put together a plan on how this fundraising or funding acquisition is going to happen. Your governance committee, chances are you're going to need some training. You may need to bring in additional board members. You might have to look at hiring policies, things like that. That's your governance committee. And so go back to this really quick. This is 3. Was that my right number 3? And so there are a lot of other committees you could add, but I start with these to say, if you are a young nonprofit, you guys don't overwhelm yourselves. Don't. And so start with the very basic committees that they're very traditional that most organizations have, and work your way up from there. And on these committees, you only need at least 2 people. You can serve on multiple committees, and that way you have opportunities to meet when the board isn't meeting, to do the work and make sure that your reports get to the board chair so that your information can get on an agenda to have a discussion around the work that you did in your committees. And so hoping that makes sense. And if not, please make sure you ask the questions, and I'm happy to circle back. All righty. And so the long and short of it is, as a board, it's your responsibility to ensure everything. It's your responsibility to ensure that the organization has a guiding star, that has a mission, objectives, and that you are following that mission and those objectives, and that if that mission requires, and it typically does, resources, that is your role to ensure that those resources happen, that you bring those resources in. And sometimes that even means a plan for how you're going to distribute and give out of your own personal finances to support the organization. So it is the board's job to determine how you're going to raise resources and what your involvement is going to be. All righty. And so I mentioned that if you had time, chances are you won't in the first meeting, but that just means you've got to circle back to program development. The whole reason that your organization is established is because you've got a mission and a cause. And behind that cause, there's got to be some work, some activity to ensure that you are fulfilling that mission every single day, right? And day in the life of your nonprofit. And so what does that look like to you? It'll look different for everybody, but needless to say, it's usually services. So you're going to figure out, what kinds of services are we going to offer? How are we going to present that to the general public? And I've got here corporate presence. So before once you start working on your program development, you're going to have to package yourself somewhere. Usually that's online. And so you're going to have a corporate presence. Obviously, it might be physical. Online, 100% of the people looking for you are looking for you online. So are you there? So you need to be there. Your telephone number, your email, those things are really important. And I'm going to take a quick pause. I know we've got a series that we're going to implement where we're talking about different subject matters regarding the nonprofit world. But it is really important that you guys understand that when you're in pursuit of funding, the funder is going to see your package before they read the content of the package, right? And So what they're going to be looking at is your overall, the view of who you are, your name, your website, your colors, your logo, your phone. Is it your personal cell phone? They're going to find out quickly when they call. Your email address, is it ending in AOL? I just recently saw one of those, didn't know AOL was still around, but so what is your email address ending in? Does it end in .org like the traditional nonprofit email addresses do? And so I bring this up to say, if you take one of those things in isolation, it's no big deal. But if you look at all of these things and you don't have a website, you're using your cell phone, the email address is your personal email address. So a funder is not going to be, quickly ready to do business with you, the person. They're interested in doing business with the organization. So you want to make sure that your organization has its own standalone presence outside of you. You are the contact person for the organization. You are not the organization. Might feel like it day to day. Hey, I get that, been there, done that. But the organization is an independent entity and you represent it. And so I'm saying that to you guys to say, you want to bring together this presence, because if you are doing amazing work, but your package is little, not put together, then nobody will ever even know it because they won't get past the package. So making sure you've got a good corporate presence is important. And then you get to the descriptions of your program. Like, what is this program going to do? And again, if you are a nonprofit, you're going to have the day-to-day operations reserved for the day-to-day staff. But you guys, I already know, if this is a new organization, you are the day-to-day staff. So I get it, right? So in the beginning, you are it. So you're going to create this program description that you might be implementing on the, day-to-day, but eventually you're going to have staff or volunteers that do this day-to-day work, on behalf of the organization. So create the description of what that is. Everybody's going to ask you. Everybody. It can't just be in your head. It's got to be on paper, because funders, community stakeholders, the people that you're going to service, everybody's going to want to know what this thing is. So be prepared to actually articulate that in writing. Create an organization budget once you do that. You always create your budget following your description of your program. It never comes first, ever. It can't. It doesn't make sense to come first, because the budget is based on what you're going to be doing. So if you don't know what you're going to be doing, then you really don't know what your budget is. And so create a description of the program, making sure that you identify each service. And then from that description, you're going to monetize that service over to the budget. And so those are big words. What does that mean? That means that, let's take, for example, you are, and I'll take one that people often say to me, well, Cheryl, how do I create a budget for mentoring? I'm just meeting with kids. So I like to use this as an example. You're not just meeting with kids. In order for that meeting to happen, you had to do something. You probably drove there. And if you say, well, no, it's virtual, then you paid for something to make that virtual meeting happen. What are you giving to those kids? Are they going to be doing, using journals or, vision boarding? Are there books that they need to have? Are you going to be giving school supplies? So what I'm wanting you to do is think about the service and then what it cost you to implement that service. Whatever that cost is, it's those costs that get transitioned to the budget. And so just to make that a little bit easier, think about what you want to do, what the cost associated with that is, and then make that a budget item, right? And so that's how you create your budget. Now, there's, in addition to the program descriptions, there's also, in this first 3 months, you guys, required registrations. Yeah. So you've got things you got to do. You are now a legal organization and you've got legal obligations. And if you are 501c3, you have federal and state legal obligations. So you've got to figure out what those are. There really isn't at this point when you're a corporation an excuse to say, I didn't know, because the theory behind that is you should have when you started the corporation. So we're going to talk about some of these things. So legally securing your license and permits means that you have secured state and sales income tax exemption if you qualify for that. And I can tell you that if you're 501c3 organization, you do qualify for state income tax exemption. Now, it might mean you've got to apply with your Department of Treasury for that exemption, but you are going to be eligible because you're eligible at the federal level. Okay, so check with your state to figure out whether this is automatic, or is there something that we need to do with our Department of Treasury? And many times there is, where you complete an application for state income tax exemption. And sales tax exemption isn't always a guarantee. It isn't. many states only allow sales income tax exemption for certain organizations, like what's an example? I use this one a lot. Volunteer firefighters, churches, school systems, those ones that are affiliated heavily with the government, orphanages. The traditional nonprofits don't get the sales tax exemption, but you'll check with your state to make sure. Business license. Nobody put in the Q&A whether you need a business license. I don't know. I get that question all the time. Cheryl, do I need one? I don't know. Check with your county clerk's office. Let them know what it is that you're doing, and they'll be able to tell you whether or not a business license is required for your organization. So, and if it is, making sure that you make that happen. And then charitable registration, just about, there's like 42 states out of 50 states require that you register your charity before soliciting donations in the state. The state likes to know who's who's soliciting whom. And so that's going to be really important for you to figure out whether or not your state's one of those states. And I can tell you most states are, they do require it. And so, and if that's the case, then you want to make sure that that is done. I think I have a link later on, it's on this slide here, where you can go to get some of this information. And so you want to find out whether or not charitable registration is required of you. And if it is, you want to register before you start to fundraise. And then there's state regulations. And so I want to just quickly talk about state regulations, you guys. There's an annual registration that's due for just about, not all states, but just about every state. It's going to require every entity, not just the nonprofit, but all entities, to pay every year, just to keep the entity alive and in good standing. And it's usually like closely linked to the tax season. So usually it's like due in April, that annual registration. And because we're talking about Tennessee, well, we're in Tennessee now, I've just put this information for Tennessee. So yours is $20 every single year. And here's something that you do want to know. Many nonprofits don't pay it. They don't pay any attention to it. They feel like, I'm federal now, but you aren't really. Your federal tax exemption is a tax code that's been attached to the corporation. So you need to keep the corporation intact and active, because if you don't, then the federal code goes away too. So making sure that you know that. So every year, pay your annual registration, stay in good standing with your state, because you need that to even continue being that federal tax exempt organization. And in terms of charitable registration, and this information is for Tennessee. So if we've got some visitors from other states, you'll have to figure out for your own state what's required. But in Tennessee, the fee is between $50 and $250, and it does vary based on the size of your organization. So, we've got organizations that are tax exempt that earn $0 every year. And then we have the $1 billion folks like the United Ways and the Feeding Americas and Salvation Armies of the world. And so it really does, most states will have that tiered based on, your gross revenue. And so there are some exemptions, and that just varies. Again, it varies by state. For Tennessee, it's 30,000. So if you're under 30,000, then usually you can go and petition for exemption so that you don't have to pay a registration fee. You still have to register most often, but you don't have to pay a fee. You can get an exemption. And so I mentioned this to you guys for this reason. There are so many organizations that are not legitimate or legal. And it's been very challenging in the last few years, especially since COVID, for legitimate organizations to get out there and get themselves funded. And one of the ways that you can show that you are a legitimate organization is by taking the steps to register your charity with your state, because then you can have that seal of approval on your website, which helps a funder feel more comfortable funding your organization. So it has many benefits, and it's also legally required. So please do that. Please do that, your registration. I want to move over to, and we're going to pause after we get out of our first quarter, because we're still in our first quarter. As soon as we're done with our first quarter, I promise to pause. And but I want to talk about insurance. And so this is something that is so important to your world, because this insurance, not having it, can really cost you. And so there is a lot of different types of insurance that are out there, but much like the committees, I'm only going to highlight just a couple, right? And so you can work with an insurance company to figure out what's best for your organization. I'm going to talk about just these few. General liability is where we're going to start. And the reason for that is that's just the basic. I mean, if you're going to do anything, and I don't care if you're going to, usually it's like if you're going to go and do something out in the public, but nowadays it doesn't matter. If you're doing something that can cause somebody harm, it is this policy that would see a claim, right? right? And so general liability protects against harm and damage to the general public, even to your volunteers. And so you want to make sure you have it. I will tell you that if you're going to be working with like government, school systems, for instance, I used to be a live trainer prior to COVID. And I used to have to carry, I still do, $1 million policy because nobody wants to take ownership of your stuff. If you're out there and you're doing work, even if it's good work and somebody's hurt, the organization that allowed you to use their space or name, they don't want to be responsible for what happens as a result of you. So general liability is usually, something that's automatic. I started putting auto insurance because a lot of insurance providers, they're now getting keen and on your applications for insurance. They're now asking you, are you, a Lyft driver or Uber? They're asking these extra questions because they need to know how often is this vehicle being driven and is it being driven for more than just personal use? And if you're using your vehicle every day for your nonprofit, and I've got nonprofits I work with and they're delivering food, they're taking things, people back and forth, for shelter. And if you're doing that, you've got to make sure that your auto policy, your insurance company is aware of it and that you've added your company as a rider, because otherwise, if somebody's injured or you're in an accident while you're engaged in your nonprofit work, that may not be covered. And so making sure that you are taking these precautions to protect yourself, in this case, even the personal side of you, right? Workers' comp, that might not be an option. So many states, if you have more than one employee, you're going to have workers' comp because it's their protection there, meaning your employee's protection in case they're injured on the job. It's also your protection so they don't sue you. If they have workers' comp, then they can get themselves covered, medically, whatever. And so you want to make sure you've got it because that's, again, in compliance with the state. I think it's just one more. I'm going to talk about, and that's your D&O policy. And I talk about this one all the time. I mean, this is like second to me to general liability. I am on a board, and I mentioned that earlier. So I'm not just pulling these things from a hat, you guys. This is so important to protect your directors and officers. Many people think that I am, you're a charity, and so you fall under the charitable, good Samaritan laws to a degree, but not all degrees. I've researched and found out that about one in three nonprofits, they have a claim against their directors and officers liability policy, because it isn't just I'm out in the public and I'm doing some great community good. Directors and officers policies are often, we're very litigious. People will sue you if they feel like you've discriminated against them, if there's unfair practices, if you've said or done something that makes them not feel good. So they can sue you for a lot of different reasons. And if you are sued, many times they will go after you, the person, plus the organization. And if you don't have directors and officers policy, then it could be very expensive. I read that the average director and officer claim is about $35,000. And that's if you have an attorney, it's about $28,000, without. None of that sounds good to me. So I don't want to pay $28,000 or $30,000 for something I didn't do, or something that I'm really innocent of. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting your organization. And so that leads me into something else. And I don't really want to go into the weeds too much, but I am going to say something here. A lot of you all are paying yourselves, because you feel like, I'm in my organization, I'm on the board, but I'm also the executive director, I'm going to pay me. If you do that, it's going to void that policy. So I do need to tell you guys that. So that goes away when you start paying board members. And so you want to keep that in mind. Now, I'm not an insurance agency. You literally can just Google any insurance company, let them know that you are a nonprofit and you're considering policies and want to have some guidance on what's best for you. I can tell you that a comprehensive policy, that when you include all these things in your bundling, it can run you over $2,000 a year. But if you're just looking at one of these policies independently, it's usually around $500-$600 independently. And so, but you'll go and you'll get your estimates and make the best decision for you and your board. Had to spend a little time there just because this comes up so often. And the last thing we're going to talk about in quarter one is protecting your organization. That is 100%, no questions asked, a responsibility of the board. It is your job to ensure you've got internal controls in place. Internal controls are just policies that protect your organization against or deter against fraud or potential fraud. And so there's so many fraudulent schemes. I actually teach a whole class, literally 45 minutes of what's happening out there in the community. What kind of fraud do you see and how do you protect yourself with policies? for this conversation, we're just going to have one slide, and I'm going to share with you that being new and being young and small does not mean that you are not at risk. You are more at risk because you're the one that doesn't think you're at risk. So you're more at risk. And so there's conflicts out there where you may not know necessarily that the people you're engaging with have conflicts, meaning that they have an interest in another company or another individual that's taking from your organization. Ghost employees. And that's where when you get a little bigger, this happens literally, it's happening right now, happens every day, where your people have people on their payroll, right? Organizations have people on their payroll that don't really exist. And you're sending double checks to somebody in your organization who set this up, and you're paying somebody that's not really there. And you might think, well, I'm small, I'll know better. Well, you might not know better with fictitious vendors. And so you've got somebody on your board or somebody on your volunteers who will say, oh, we can do XYZ, for the organization, things that aren't even done, and you're paying anyway. Or you've got a vendor, let's say you've got a landscaper who charges you like once a month for landscaping. And then you notice an invoice that comes in and it's within the month. So it's a double invoice. This happens so often, you guys. And so I want you to be looking at these dates, because sometimes you'll get an extra invoice in there and you'll think, oh, that's just, maybe we forgot to pay them. But some companies literally will do this and send you an invoice for work not done. And so I want you to pay attention to some of these things, because it's not uncommon. It's actually more common than you think. And so the internal controls, what kinds of things can you set up? I'm going to just talk about 3. Well, actually 2. Let's bring them all on the screen here. All right. So first thing you do is you create an assessment of what's at risk. I want you to be looking around your organization internally to see what do we have that somebody could, potentially take advantage of. And first and foremost, the organization itself. So sharing your banking information, sharing a lot of the private or, proprietary information about your organization. Giving up, like I said, the bank account, the routing account. I've had a nonprofit recently, I think it was this last week, tell me they gave their social security number. Somebody asked for it. I don't know why people would do that. So giving out that kind of information isn't okay. So figure out what's at risk. And then one of the policies that you can put in place, like right now, separation of duties. And that means that the person that's in charge of bringing in, taking in the mail to, document the check isn't the same person that deposits the check, or isn't the same person that reconciles the bank account, right? So separate the money so that you've got more than one, set of hands on the money. Second thing is dual authorization. I like this one a lot. And that means no checks can get cashed without 2 signatures. And so if you're young, you might have a threshold to say, no more than $250, $500, but when you get to be a larger organization, that might go up to 1,000. You'll pick the denomination, but having a policy in place that says that we don't cash checks unless it's a signature from the board and, at least 2 signatures. That means 2 different people approve that. So you're not just, you've got random invoices being paid and things out there. So control the authorization of money. And those are the 2 things you can, I can think of right now immediately that you can actually do to protect your organization. Tons others. But those 2 are going to be helpful for you. And so that ends the quarter.
Cheryl, time out. We got questions.
Yeah, we're stopping right here at the end of the quarter.
Okay. All right. We actually have some good questions. I want to go back to your insurance slide.
Okay.
And make sure I understand. So what you're saying is if you pay yourself to be the director or whatever your title is as the chief operating officer of this organization, you should not be on the board because you can't pay the board, and then that would cancel your insurance.
Yeah, it will void that. Yeah. And so you could be on the board as a non-voting member, but that's it. So voting members of the board, aren't paid. And if they are paid, paying yourself is not an illegal activity. You just can't have that policy.
Okay. All right. Tia asks, as the founder of a nonprofit, does it mean you do not have any control and all business and ideas are solely handled by the executive board? I'm concerned that a foundation named after my child, and it is my brainchild, there's a possibility of the board voting me out.
Yeah, that's all correct. And so you want to know that. And I don't mean to say it flippantly, but you do have to know the facts. And the facts are, if you're a public charity, you don't own it. Naming it after your daughter is a beautiful thing and a testimony to you as a parent and her as a child. But that organization can easily change hands. And so, no, you don't have control. So that's the short answer. So one of the things I try to do with nonprofits, I always say in the very beginning, you want to bring on board members that you know, like, and trust. That's really important. I have nonprofit organizations where the founder will try to they'll go to matching sites and get anybody they can, and all these big name titles and people, PhDs and all these things. They don't know these individuals, and you're so young. The direction of your organization was set by you, whether it was God-given, in a dream, something you planned, doesn't matter. You set the direction. And when you bring on board members, just so that you know, the second you elect your governing body, you have put that beautiful mission in the hands of these individuals to further it, and they can also change it. So that's the short answer.
Okay. Nicole had a question about the stuff you were talking about for Tennessee about being registered and incorporated. Does that apply only to the states you're registered or incorporated in? If you're primarily virtual and not soliciting to someone in a different state specifically, do you have but they donate, do you still have to register in that state?
And so I like this question, but I don't always know how to answer it, and nor does the rest of the country. And so what happens is that I can tell you what the nonprofit corporation laws across the states say. And they say if you're going to be soliciting or receiving donations and the donate now button on your website counts, then you got to register in those states. So that's what it says. But I can tell you a pattern of activity of what actually happens. The pattern of activity of what happens is if you've got a donate now button on your website, I've not known a single person that's come back to me to say, somebody in the Attorney General in New York says I've got to register. I don't have that happen. But if you are actively soliciting in New York and you are located, say, in Tennessee, then yes, if you're actively soliciting, you do need to register in those states that you're actively soliciting in. But it wouldn't be fair of me to tell you, don't worry about the other states. I can just tell you the pattern of activity is that those other states don't usually pursue that. But the corporation laws in most states say they can. But I can tell you the pattern of activity is they usually don't, unless it's an active participation on your part to go after, donations in their state.
So a donate now button would not be considered an active.
No, that's what I'm saying. If you look at the nonprofit corporation laws, donate now button is considered. Okay. But the pattern of activity is what I want to focus on. The pattern of activity for the attorney generals is they're not caring about your donation now button and somebody from their state saw it. What they care about is, are you actively soliciting and going after people in their state to contribute to you? And if that's happening, then they're going to have an issue if you're not registered.
I got you. All right. T has a second question. Can you create and run, in parentheses, fundraising, hosting events, etc., a nonprofit if not all of the executive board positions have been filled immediately? A concern if fundraising, asking for donations or looking for grants should be placed on pause if those positions have not been fulfilled yet.
So I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you saying that should you pursue fundraising before the board is in place? Is that what that question is?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you can absolutely pursue fundraising before the board is in place. I don't know why you would, but you could do that if you wanted to. But again, get your ducks in a row. I just trained a class last night with another SCORE, and we talked about contracts. Get your house in order first, right? And so I would say my strong recommendation to you would be get the board of directors, get the folks that's going to help you. Your nonprofit shouldn't be operated in a silo. You need the other brains. Get those folks involved so they can help you, so that you're not doing it alone. But the short answer to your question is, yeah, you can do this without having a complete board.
Okay, and we got one more from anonymous attendee. Can you pay yourself if you are a private nonprofit?
Well, so there really isn't a private nonprofit. So you either have a public charity or a private foundation, but even those fall under 501c3. So you're still looking at 501c3. And so can you pay yourself? You can always pay yourself. The question you want to look at is, should you pay yourself? So are you pursuing funding where paying yourself as a board member could jeopardize that funding? Are you paying yourself from the monies that you receive before you've implemented your programs? So you want to look at what's the best practice for paying yourself, and is that pay in alignment with the standard pay that other people in that description for that job is being paid. So you want to look at some of those other parameters first.
I think we are at the end. Let's go to quarter two.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And you guys, thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming, because if you're thinking it, somebody else is too. So thank you. We're going to look at, so there's a lot that we had to do in our first quarter, right? Getting ourselves together. So now we're going to look at our next quarter, and this is about strategy. So you've got the foundation laid. And so now it's about planning and moving forward. And so Ellie P. Dot said, strategy is just a fancy word for coming up with a long-term plan to put something into action. So we're going to look at some action-oriented things like your strategic support. Where are they? How do you get them? You know, these are verbs now. We're going to get at the, you know, these folks. Program operations and income sustainability. So we're going to touch on each of these. And so let's start with your strategic support. So we mentioned earlier, we don't operate in a silo. It's one of those things where you come out of your comfort zone, you know, so to speak. You can't just stay in your home office or whatever and operate your nonprofit. You're going to want to connect to other organizations. I have community foundations listed there because a community foundation is also a 501c3 organization. They're established to move a community forward, right? And so they usually are in your backyard too. There's over 800 community foundations in the United States. And so they cover the gamut. Some of them are only going to offer technical support, but most of the community foundations are going to offer the nonprofit organization technical support and funding. And that is so paramount to your sustainability because you don't know everything yet. They've been around. This is what they do. And they offer grants that other people outside of this territory cannot apply for. So you're already limiting some of the competition just by applying for grants that's offered through your community foundation. You can Google community foundation, your state or your county, and your community foundation should come up. Pro bono partnerships is another. When you're very new, and I remember you guys being so new and just anything, we're new at some point, you know, with everything that we do. And it's hard to find somebody that can help you, somebody you can bounce things off of. And so when I think about pro bono partnerships, these are attorneys that have pulled their resources together to give you expert legal advice. Free or very low cost. I say free first because most of them are free, but some pro bonos will charge a very nominal amount of money. But these attorneys will help you with things like your employee manual, your charitable registration, looking over your contracts before you sign them. They're invaluable, their services are. And so find out who your pro bono partnership is. And I'm a Google University gal, so go to Google pro bono partnership, Tennessee, or whichever state you're in. So then you should get a listing of pro bono partnerships. Usually it's like one per territory, and sometimes they're aggregated with different states and like Southeast. I know New York has some pretty big ones, but you want to connect with these folks because this is a way that you can save your bottom line. You can use those dollars toward your programs and not toward operations, trying to make sure that you are doing things legally compliant. Have attorneys look this over for you. The other is multidisciplinary teams. I cannot stress this enough. I really should have a quote here. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And so your partnerships are they're imperative to your longevity. These folks in multidisciplinary, first, let's define that. It just means that you're dealing with the segment of other organizations that's serving the same population that you are. And so most often these are headed up, or at least, put together by, believe it or not, a lot of state agencies. And so you might find Housing Authority might lead a partnership or a disciplinary meeting. DFACS, your Department of Human Resources. So go to your state agencies, find the agency that closely connects or aligns with what it is you're doing, and then peruse their website or call, a contact there to see, are there any public meetings, so that you can be a part of those public meetings. And if you can't find a public meeting for a multidisciplinary, group, create one. How do you do that? If you're homeless shelter, go and find other homeless shelters, food pantries, workforce development, clothing, organizations. Find the organizations that are serving the same population as you, and then you guys start to meet once a quarter. That's multidisciplinary, because they're going to inevitably have access to resources, including funding opportunities that you may not have come across on your own. And so utilize these meetings, and from these meetings, inevitably, you're going to create partnerships, and we're going to talk about that. And so your list of partners in this quarter, you may decide to not only make the list, but actually form the partnership. But you've got a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces. And so when you attend a multidisciplinary meeting, this is the thing you do. Get your pen and paper or phone, however you're taking your notes, and just make a list of some of the folks that are really like-minded that you think would make excellent partners for you. You don't need to do anything with it right now because you're still in the planning phase, but at least get that list together. And then if you get to a point where you're actually implementing your programs, which we're going to talk about here shortly, then you're going to need agreements. And so eventually you're going to need partner MOU volunteer agreements. So this is the quarter where you start to put these planning documents together. So you're going to create your MOU. MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. All right. It's just an agreement between organizations that share how they're going to work together, what the partnership could look like. I've seen them over 150 pages, and I've also created and seen a single page MOU. Don't, that keep it simple. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your life. One page will do. It's just an agreement that says we're partners and this is how. That's it. All righty. And your volunteer agreement. Yeah, you actually want those. Is it required? No, but you should have one, because volunteers who are in an agreement tend to hang out with you longer. So have an agreement with your volunteer that says, you agree to volunteer, and these are some of the things that we'd love for you to do. In turn, we agree to give you mentoring and guidance and training around that thing and support. You can put us on a resume, anything that's going to help you move forward too. So there's mutual covenants there. And so you have that agreement, which helps solidify that really important relationship for human resources, right? And so that's your strategic support. In your second quarter, you have, in your first quarter, remember, you wrote out your program description. You did that like a couple months ago. Well, now you're going to have to back up some of that by making sure that you've got the program operations that's going to house that description. What does this look like? So you've got your organizational chart now you're putting together. You've got some funders ask for that, and your org chart is just a chart that shows how the organization is set up. Usually you'll see the board of directors, followed by your executives, like your executive director, or if you've got like officer positions, then you'll see CEO, CFO, COO, etc. Then you've got your staff underneath that layer, and your very last layer, but very important, are your volunteers, right? And so this is your org chart. Usually you'll see it shaped as a pyramid, but that's your org chart. So you want that. Your staff job descriptions. And so I can hear some of you saying, well, Cheryl, I just got my determination letter. I don't have any staff, but you will. You're going to grow. And so think about some of these things, these services that you're offering. What person or what job needs to actually fulfill that service? And so start thinking about that. And again, I'm one of those people, don't recreate the wheel. You can go over to Indeed or salary.com, Google different jobs, and start to look at what other folks have said about that same position title that you're interested in. And from those descriptions, craft yours. Doesn't have to be overcomplicated. Create your descriptions, your handbook, and then your program forms. A program form could be a registration or enrollment form, right? And so start to create the forms that your program is going to need. There are a lot of programs that do pre-assessments or surveys. Start to create those so that if I come along and you're a homeless shelter, or let's say that you're non-residential, but you offer a lot of services and I could use it, I'm going to want to be able to read something to see how you can help me. And then you may need something from me. I may need to sign up and give you a bit of information, do an assessment about my mental status or whatever. These are program forms. So start putting together your program forms so that you are getting your house together before you start inviting people in. We've got this last segment to finish out, round out quarter quarter two, and this one's important. And then I'm going to pause to take questions. So income and sustainability in our second quarter, and you guys are probably thinking, I was thinking about money before we were, official. And I get it. I don't blame you. Money is a dignified conversation to have. And if you haven't had it up front, you definitely want to have it when you're in this second quarter. So you want to create your fundraising plan, and it's going to include different avenues or modalities that you will use to secure funding for your organization. And these should be all mission aligned. So I'm going to just make the assumption that everything you're doing is mission aligned to further the nonprofit and not some off things that you are planning to do through your nonprofit. I hear that a lot. That's not tax exempt stuff. So we're talking about mission aligned. So looking at fundraising, that's where you're going to get most of your money from individuals out in your community or just giving. Looking at grants, and by grants, I mean grants from corporations, grants from private foundations, you get grants from the government, looking at grant opportunities. And even before you start to put together a fundraising plan, if you're just curious, you can go to grant databases, many of them are free, and just start looking at, well, what kinds of opportunities are there out there? What are they asking of me? What do I need to do to get prepared for a grant? And so looking at that, because individuals may be the largest share of charitable giving every single year, but grants are number two. And if we include government grants, and many people don't, but if you include government, private foundation, and corporate grants, then grants would be the number one source of charitable contributions to public charities. But government aside, grants are worth it, long game, but you want that in your plan. Sponsorships. And so these are just corporations. They may have a foundation, but I'm not talking about the foundation side. I'm talking about just the corporation, the Target store, all the businesses that you see in your community. These businesses in your community, I need you to be looking at them as potential opportunities because they may be willing to sponsor something that you are doing. And those sponsorships come in handy. They will save you money. And usually those sponsorships you can use as unrestricted. So if you have a sponsorship from a company in exchange for content, logo placement, whatever it is you all have negotiated, they usually sponsor you to move your mission forward. And they're not going to say, buy a computer with this. That's very uncanny. What's common is they'll give you a couple thousand or whatever it is that you've asked for so that you can further your mission. And so lots of times that can be used even for salaries, which I know is really important to many of you on this call. And the other thing is fee for services. Over 50% of all nonprofits in the US, they do something where they bring in money. That's not grant, that's not fundraising, just flat out fee. What comes to mind immediately, housing, where you're charging rents, childcare, where you're charging, tuition. So there's something that you're doing. There's training where people are using their brains. They've created training programs. There's something that you're doing to bring in and generate money. And so fee for services, think about, what are you exceptionally great at? What can you codify and sell on a regular basis? Where can you charge for services that are mission aligned? Because that's going to help you tremendously. Because here's the deal. A lot of these things that we've talked about, there really are strings attached. You got to be able to say, I'll do this if you give me that. But when we talk about fee for services, you use that's your bottom line money. You bring in fee for services, you can pay your salaries. And I would strongly encourage you to do that because you'll get more opportunities as a new nonprofit to get grants for your programs than you will, getting grants for operations. So if you can figure out what you can do to bring in fee for services, all of that money could be used for operations. So that's up to you. That's up to your discretion. So I like that for that reason. So you want to start putting together your fundraising plan. You can start to implement that soon. And that's in your quarter. That's in your second quarter. I'm going to pause here for questions, Gary. What do we have?
We have one from Sophia. It says, for clarity, if you are the founder of your 501c3 and you serve on your own board and you run programs, etc., when you pay yourself as an employee of your organization, can you still vote on the board?
So the answer to that is yes, but now that goes back to should you? And so the vast majority of nonprofit board members are not paid because it can interfere with your ability to be funded. So if you want to be paid, then you will remove yourself from the board. If you want to be paid and not jeopardize grant funding, let's make that a little more clear, then what typically nonprofit founders will do is they will remove themselves from the board as a voting member. You're still unofficial, but you would remove yourself from the board as a voting member, and then you would take on your executive director role and pay yourself. Yeah.
That's it. That's what we
That was
got.
it. Okay, so we're cooking with oil now, you guys. We're in our third quarter, and so well done is better than well said. So now it's not about just planning and thinking things to death. Now it's actually doing these things. And so we're going to look at program resources, launching the program, funding, and professional development. And so program resources and launch. So we've made our list already last month. We made our list of our potential partners, and so now you're going to be implementing your program. And so you want to make sure you've got those partners in tow. And so you've already made the phone call. Hey, Sally, this is Cheryl. You know, I run the local nonprofit down the street, and I've got people that regularly need your service. And I'm imagining that some of your folks might need mine. I'd love to be able to enter into an arrangement so that we can refer folks to each other. Would that be okay with you? Now, obviously, I streamline that, but that's how the conversation is going to go. You get your partners, you sign your MOU. And so now you're able to leverage those partners with your programs. You have now created your volunteer agreement. Remember, that was last month. And so now you've got that part of your house in order. So now it's time to go out and get those volunteers. And so where the government says, or federal government says, that the majority of your board shouldn't be family members, that's not the same for volunteers. You get grandma on out there and have her, you know, serve that lemonade up. So whatever it is you're doing in the community where you need volunteers, your family members, your friends, your network, you can have these folks to help and support you as volunteers. So get them trained up, get those volunteer agreements signed, and get your volunteers out in the community representing you. This is what they will be doing. Create the list of resources and referrals. So create yourself a referral manual. And so, you know, I like to go to the United Way a lot online, and you can go to the United Way and Google United Way resource guide for your state. Usually there is one. And so you're not going to put your label on it and use it. Instead, you'll just forward the United Way's resource guide to the people that you serve, or create your own. Go through your community and figure out what's going to be most useful to the people that you serve, and then create a resource guide so that everybody you come in contact with will have access to programs and support for things that fall outside of your scope. You can't be all things to all people. I want you to know that, like, up front. You've got a huge heart. I can already tell this. You've got a huge heart, but you can't do all things. And so being sure to stay in your lane. Being busy is not the same as being productive. And some of us, we excel from being busy. I used to be guilty, but I had to stop that. Okay. And so I had to stop that. And so now I have to be productive. I don't have time in my day to be busy and not productive. So I want you to stay in your lane. If there is something that you don't do, and you know you don't do it, don't try to figure out and start a whole new program and things. Go and refer those folks to organizations that do this on a regular basis, right? And so have your resource guide in place, and then you guys begin your program. And so why did I wait to Q3 to tell you this? Well, because I assumed you probably did it earlier. There are so many people who come to me, and I literally am working with an organization right now. Can't say who, but they've been around for years and they've been planning. Start your program. Funding works this way. Funders want to support your programs. They really and truly do. They are not interested in your idea. They're interested in what you're doing. And so you're going to need to start. And even if that means if you're not ready, you don't have your building, you don't have your van, no worries, you'll grow to that. In this case, what you do is you coordinate access to those things that people need that fall under your umbrella, because that way you're at least starting your program. And many times you have no idea idea what should be changed or honed within your organization if you've not started serving people. I will tell you, people will help you to keep it real. They will keep you to the ground because they will let you know this is or this is not working for us. And until you start working in your program, you will not have that ability to perfect what it is you're planning to do every day. So there's nothing to fear, guys. Get out there and start the program. So start your program. And then when you launch your program, this is the one thing that I do want to share because, everybody, me too, guilty of it. You've got these huge ideas. Your mind is probably popping off a different idea like every moment, and you can't even sleep at night. You're thinking of new things. You got the notepad side of the bed. You're taking notes every night. But what I want to share with you is please start small. Think big. Don't let anybody step on your parade, but you've got to start small. If you jump out the door with every possible thing that your nonprofit can do, and you've got a budget of a cool $1.5 million, 5 years from now, you'll be still trying to get that $1.5 million. So what I would prefer you to do is create a realistic, small budget, skeletal things that you need, start to collect the money to get the program off the ground, and then start to gradually scale up and add the next program, and then get that wheel churning, then add the next program. You guys, I remember when I first moved out, I was in my 20s, long time ago, and I wanted the whole house furnished. And my mother said, baby, one pillow at a time. I said, what? Huh? I need the whole, she says, one pillow at a time, baby. She says, you'll eventually have the whole sofa. And I thought, oh, this woman, she's so wise. But I'm saying that to you guys to say, one pillow at a time, do one thing at a time. Eventually you will look back and you will have everything that you've imagined for this nonprofit. But don't go out there and tell a funder that your budget's $500,000, because what they're going to say is, this isn't feasible. We're out. You guys have seen Shark Tank. We're out. So we want them in, not out. Okay. Start small. We're going to talk about a little bit about program development, implementing your fundraising plan. And so that fundraising plan that you put together, it's time to implement it. And so the board committee, a long time ago, we put together that fundraising committee, and then that fundraising committee helped us to put together our fundraising plan. And so it's now time for that fundraising committee to start soliciting who's going to help them. And it could be internal. Remember, I said it's the board's job to determine their role and where these resources come from, but it may be external too. So you may need external help. Sometimes it's going to cost you. Sometimes it is not. You've got SCORE. They're going to be one of my resources I'm going to mention here shortly. So it's time to figure out who's going to help to implement this plan. And so it's time for you to implement, figure out who's going to help you to do that, and then start applying for funding. Do not be afraid of that. You've got to get your feet wet. Apply for funding. I think you're going to be very surprised. There's going to be more no's than yeses, you guys. Thicken up that skin, right? And go after the funding that your organization deserves. Track the activities. Do you remember when I said, if you don't have the building and the van, you start coordinating? Let's say I'm a homeless shelter and I want to shelter people. I need a house, right? Or building, but I don't have the funds for that yet. And so instead I go work with the homeless population, and I make sure with my resource guide, remember, everything is going to come back around circle. I'm going to make sure that I coordinate access so they can get to the organizations that do house them or that can house them. They get the information they need. I'm going to track that so that when I go to apply for funding, I'm going to be able to tell a funder that I'm looking for, money for a building because the need is great in my community. For the past year, 6 months, you name the time frame, I've been helping people access, housing. What's happening in our neighborhood is that there's not enough housing. We have a shortage. And so we've got to do more. If we invest in homeless people, then as a result of that, we save taxpayer income. So you name what your story and your ask is going to be, but you can't make that ask for that larger amount until you've started your program, you've tracked your activities, and you're able to share sustainable data with the potential funder. That's how that works. Engage in professional development. We have a series here that we're doing through SCORE Tennessee and Memphis in Tennessee. And so join in, you guys. This is complimentary services. And so, I won't go into what I normally charge for these kind of sessions, but SCORE is offering this to you at no fee. And so pop in here, get the information you need, pop back out if you got to go to work, but come in here and get some key nuggets that's going to help you move yourselves forward, invest in you. And thereby, by extension, you're investing in your community. In your last month, this is where your last quarter, I got to pause. I'm sorry, Gary. Were there questions for quarter 3?
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay, good deal. So we're now in our last quarter. And so this is the assessment phase. And so you're going to be looking back. Sometimes you've got to look back in order to understand the things that lie ahead, Yvonne Wu. And so this is where you look back on your previous year to say, how did we do? How did our programs work? Did we do the things that we said we were going to do? What happened with us? Did we all show up as a board for this organization? Is it time for us to expand? Do we need more team members in order for us to actualize our true vision? And if it's a board team member that you need, then you look at the composition you currently have and you look at the board involvement to see the areas where you could have been improved as a board, right? And so if you decide, yeah, it is time to grow, and it's usually the board first, then you're going to look at, I like 3 buckets: the people who bring in money, the people who monitor that money, and the people that help and represent the community that you serve. The people who bring in money, this is like usually those people who they never meet a stranger. You've met them, right? They are always happy and smiling, cannot wait to have a discussion with you. You need that kind of that happy-go-lucky person, right? They're really concerned about what everybody else is doing and they don't mind meeting a new person. And then you need that person who they might not want to meet new people, but they will sure look over your numbers to make sure that you are doing the thing that you said you were going to do financially and business-wise. That's somebody who is very business-oriented, right? We all know those analytical people. You make a very unassuming comment and they will break down every word, right? You need that person. That person's good for you. So you want that person on your board too. And then you need somebody that represents your community. Yeah. Funders are asking that now. They're asking who, this is a question I get a lot, who on the board represents the community? You want to be affirmative and tell them that you've got board members that do. But more importantly than that, not just for show and tell, you actually want that person on your board because that's going to help you to stay in tune with your community needs. And that really is important for a public charity. And so beyond that assessment of your board, you're looking at your budget, your spending. What happened? What happened this past year? The way you planned the budget the first year, you probably didn't have informed decision making because you didn't know how programs would go, but now you do. So now look back at the budget to see in what areas did we just nail it and what areas could we have improved in terms of our predictions of what we need to spend or receive. Your budget cycle begins in your 4th quarter. So we're in calendar year right now, we're in September. So beginning October 1 through December 31st, if you're on the calendar year, that's the time where your board is going to do the look back phase and start to figure out what does next year, 2024, look like for us. And then if you've got staff, the staff will create your budget and the board will approve it. If you don't have staff yet, no worries. The finance committee will create your budget and then the board will approve it. But you want an approved budget going into January 1, 2024. And then annual compliance, you're not really going to be doing anything in 4th quarter, but I just want you to know that it's in 4th quarter that you're reminding everybody to get all the paperwork and financials in place because come January, it's time to be looking at your compliance, the IRS 990, your annual registration, charitable registration if it's on an annual basis. And if you were one of those organizations that needed a business license, that's also going to come due with the new year. So you don't do anything in the current year, but you are going to make yourselves aware and put it on your calendar that you need to have this information in place so you're prepared for your annual registrations. And then, so where do you get support? I'm going to just go right through this piece so I can answer the last questions. But your nonprofit support, you guys, there's more places than I can even name. I'm starting with SCORE. SCOREs are best kept secret for a lot of nonprofits. Many people don't realize that although SCORE receives money from the SBA, which traditionally doesn't fund nonprofit work, SCORE does get to work with the nonprofit community. You can work with a SCORE mentor for as long as you need. That's that person that you can bounce those ideas off. And I can tell you this, I used to be a SCORE mentee and mentor. And if I had a mentee that I was mentoring that needed something that fell outside of my scope, I helped them get to the right mentor. So even if you've got a challenging question or a challenging situation, that mentor wants to help you. And so I would say, look at SCORE. I listed us because I would be remiss. I used to always put our organization on the back burner, never promoting us because I'm not that kind of a person, but I can't do that because that wouldn't be fair. We do a lot of work to support the nonprofit community. And so we're on this resource list too. There's Google. I love Google. I literally research something starting with Google, at least as my starting point, every single day. Most of what we're talking about and everything on this list, you can Google first. So if you're not a part of the SCORE Memphis group or network, if that's not your home base, you can go to you can Google SCORE and find your location. You can Google IRS or anything else on this list, and you can find what you need. Just do a bit of your own work. And I promise this is how this starts. It'll work out. IRS has some amazing short videos called Staying Exempt. Google that. Take them. They're 20 minutes. They'll help you. Your Secretary of State is a nice resource for how to keep yourself legal. The National Council of Nonprofits. Yeah, we actually have our own advocacy wing, and they're the largest advocacy for nonprofits in the whole country. Go to their website. There's lots of resources there for you. GuideStar. If you are a 501c3 organization, you're already there because they download all the data from the IRS every single month. So you're there. Plus the foundations that you want to apply for, they're there too. So you can do a bit of research about these on these foundations. Pro bono, I had to mention them twice because I think they're amazing. And so these are some places where you can actually get support, some live support, some online support, but support nonetheless to help you to move your organization forward. And again, just, circling back to SCORE Memphis and thanking SCORE Memphis for giving me this platform to be able to share information, which is one of my favorite things to do. And to reach SCORE Memphis, you literally can go to score.org/Memphis to get to their main page. You can email them, call them. I don't know if you'll visit. You guys accepting visitors, Gary? But you can get to your SCORE location. And then there's us. So we're doing nonprofit services. I am Cheryl Smith, and this has been my absolute joy and pleasure to be with you guys today. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to take more questions now, Gary. We've got a few more minutes.
Yeah, I don't see any questions, folks. We're about to close up, and if you have questions, go ahead and get them in. Cheryl, thank you so much. I put in a note over here in the chat that Cheryl did a great session since she was talking in quarter 4 again about how your board needs to be populated. And she did a great session for us last month on nonprofit board development. So I put the link to that over on our YouTube channel that you can see. So you can check that out as well. We will be back. Cheryl will be back on the 21st of this month with a session called Becoming Grant Ready. I'm sure Mr. Grant will appreciate that. I don't know if that's General Grant or which Grant you're talking about there, but no, she has a great session about that coming up, and we're always very happy to have you here, Cheryl. We have 2 more on social media coming up this month on the 19th, LinkedIn and X, and then on the 27th, TikTok. So we'll be around for that. Cheryl, I don't see any more questions, so I think we're going to close it out here a minute or 2 early. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all your amazing information. You're just fantastic, and I'm so glad that we have this partnership.
Thank you so much. And ditto to everything you just said. And thank you to everybody that showed up today. I appreciate everything you're doing to move your communities forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, everyone.
Bye.